On the 6th of February, 2026, a search team in Olympic National Park walked into an off-trail area near Hidden Lake and found the body of a 26-year-old woman from St. Louis. Her name was Alicia Bulia. Her family called her Angel. Her rental car had been sitting at the Sol Duke trailhead since the 30th of November. She had last been seen on the 17th of that month in a store in Port Angeles. Her body was found within a few miles of the car she left behind. It took 10 weeks, 41 search and rescue personnel, 5K9 teams. And when the Clallam County Coroner's Office released its finding, it said this: hypothermia, accidental, no foul play. Sit with that for a second. A woman disappeared inside a national park for 10 weeks, a few miles from her own vehicle, and the official answer is that nothing unusual happened to her. That is the thing this whole genre gets backwards. People vanish in national parks. That part is true, and it is documented, and it is more common than most visitors realize. But the disappearance and the death are two separate events, and only one of them is a mystery. This channel breaks down why these places actually kill people, using the real record instead of the retellings. If that's what you're here for, subscribe. By the end of this, you'll understand what genuinely kills people in the Pacific Northwest's national parks, and why the strangest part of these cases is almost never the dying. Let's establish what we're actually looking at, because the numbers are not what the genre implies. Olympic National Park recorded 52 deaths between 2007 and 2023. In that same window, it received 51,316,597 visitors. Do that division and you get 1 death per million visits. The average across all American national parks is 1.3. Olympic is below average. That's the first thing that should reorganize your thinking. This is a park of nearly 1 million acres, roughly 95% of it designated wilderness, reachable only on foot or horseback, soaked under more than 12 feet of rain a year. And statistically, per visit, it is safer than the national park system as a whole. Across the entire system, the National Park Service recorded 990 deaths between 2014 and 2016. That's an average of 330 a year. The mortality rate works out to 0.1 deaths per 100,000 recreational visits, which is a very small number. But small numbers multiplied by enormous numbers produce a quiet, reliable certainty. 330 people a year is not a statistical fluke, it's an output. The system runs and it produces roughly the same figure annually. And the deaths are not randomly distributed across causes. Since 2007, the leading causes of unintentional death in the parks have been consistent to the point of monotony. Drowning at 33%, motor vehicle crashes at 31%, falls at 17%. 79% of the people who die are male. 53% are 45 or older. There is nothing mysterious in that shape. It's a demographic profile, not a phenomenon. So here's the tension the rest of this video lives inside. The mortality record for these parks is boring, predictable, almost bureaucratic. The search and rescue record is not. Olympic logged 204 search and rescue incidents between 2018 and 2020, the 9th highest total in the United States. 84 in 2019 alone. Its rangers respond to roughly 150 emergency calls a year. Ordinary deaths. Extraordinary difficulty finding the people they happen to. That gap is the entire story. Let me show you how it opens. Every dangerous environment lies to you in a specific way, and the lie is usually about difficulty. The desert lies about water. The mountain lies about altitude. Olympic lies about temperature. Here's what almost nobody accounts for. Your body does not have a sensor for the thing that's actually killing you here. You have a sensor for cold. You feel cold, you shiver, you put on a jacket. What you do not have is a sensor for heat loss. Those are different. And on the Olympic Peninsula, the second one runs constantly, while the first one barely registers a complaint. Think about what a day in this park looks like from the inside. 45 degrees, gray, steady drizzle, the kind that isn't dramatic enough to turn back for. You've got a rain shell on. You're walking uphill, so you're warm, genuinely warm, warm enough that you don't zip up. You're sweating slightly under the shell. Nothing in that description feels like a hazard. It feels like a Tuesday. And this is where the environment sets its terms. The infrastructure encourages you. There are visitor centers and paved pullouts and signposted loop trails with mileage on them. There are families on the same path. Your brain runs the arithmetic every human brain runs. Other people are here. This is maintained. This is fine. And it comes back with a green light. That green light is the product. Because the environment doesn't kill you with one enormous obvious event. It doesn't need to. It quietly removes your margin, your dry clothes, your daylight, your body heat, your ability to think clearly about your own situation. Until an ordinary mistake, the kind you've made 100 times without consequence, becomes the last one. The dying, when it happens, is completely ordinary. It's the not being found that looks supernatural. Hold on to that because we're going to come back to it repeatedly. First, though, the killer itself. And it is not what the search parties get asked about. When someone disappears in a national park, the questions arrive in a predictable order. Was it an animal? Was it a fall? Was it a person? Let's take the first one off the table immediately because it's the one the genre runs on. In the record I could search, there is no verified fatal bear or cougar attack in Olympic National Park. None on file. That is not the same as saying it has never happened. Absence of evidence isn't proof, but it does mean this. The predator that dominates the imagination has essentially no body count in the place people imagine it. The actual leading killer does not look like a killer at all. It's cold and it's wet, and it operates at temperatures you would describe as mild. Hypothermia is defined as a core body temperature below 95 degrees Fahrenheit, 35 Celsius. The number people expect is much lower than that. Freezing, blizzards, ice. Most cases develop between 30 and 50 degrees. Here's the mechanism, and this is the part almost nobody explains properly. Wet clothing loses heat roughly 25 times faster than dry clothing. Wind strips heat directly off skin and out of fabric. And exhaustion takes away your last defense, because shivering is a heat-generating process, and spent muscle can't do it. Put those three together, and a 45-degree rainstorm is more dangerous than a dry 20-degree day. Read that again if you need to. The conditions that kill people in this park are the conditions that make you slightly uncomfortable, which brings us back to Angel Boulia. I want to be careful here, because there is a great deal we do not know, and I'm not going to invent any of it. No source describes her route after she left the car. No source describes what she was doing, or when she died, or what she was thinking. There are no words from her. Anyone who tells you otherwise is filling gaps. What is on the record is this. She flew to Washington on the 6th of November for a solo trip between jobs. She had planned to return on the 10th and extended. She was last seen on the 17th, her last phone activity was on the 18th, and she was reported missing on the 27th. Her rental car was found at the Sol Duke trailhead on the 30th. The Park Service's Investigative Services branch took the case. Searches began immediately with dogs, drones, and ground teams, and were hampered by high winds and elevated water levels. In mid-December, the search was scaled back to a clue-responsive footing. Then, in February, investigators identified a new area. They searched it on the 6th. She was there, off-trail, a few miles from where the car had been parked. Hypothermia. Accidental. No foul play. That's the answer. And I think it's more unsettling than the version people wanted. So let's go deeper into this one, because it explains more of these cases than any other single factor, and because the late stages of it are responsible for almost every "the scene didn't make sense" detail you have ever heard about a wilderness recovery. The numbers first, and I want to be honest about what they are. System-wide, hypothermia is a small category, only 23 deaths across the entire National Park Service between 2014 and 2023, concentrated in a handful of parks including Rocky Mountain, Mount Rainier, Death Valley, and Olympic. At Mount Rainier, though, it climbs. There, hypothermia accounts for 10% of all deaths, and 19% of hiker deaths specifically, 7 out of 36. So it's rare in aggregate and disproportionately lethal to hikers in this specific region. That's the pattern. Now the mechanism in stages, because the stages matter. It starts as impairment, not as suffering, Wilderness medicine has a memorable shorthand for the early warning signs, the umbles. Stumbles, mumbles, fumbles, grumbles. Coordination degrades, speech degrades, fine motor control degrades, mood degrades. Notice what all four of those have in common. They are things other people can see about you that you cannot see about yourself. That is the cruelty of this particular death. The organ making the decision about whether to turn back is the organ that has already started to fail. Then it gets stranger. In the terminal phase, cold-induced vasodilation, blood vessels opening up after prolonged constriction, produces a sudden, false sensation of heat. In a study of 69 fatal hypothermia cases by Rothschild and Schneider, roughly 25% showed what's called paradoxical undressing. The dying person removes their clothing because they feel like they're burning. And nearly all of those bodies showed something else. They were found wedged into enclosed spaces, under things, behind things, into cavities. The researchers named it terminal burrowing, and they described it as an autonomous brainstem process. A primitive, hibernation-like protective behavior that switches on at the very end. Now think about what that does to a search. It removes the person's clothing, which is often the most visible thing about them. It scatters that clothing across an area. And then it puts the body into the single hardest position to see from the air or from a trail. Every trope you have heard, the clothes found away from the body, the person found somewhere that made no sense, the scene that looked staged, has a documented physiological explanation, and it has had one since 1995. There is no mystery in it. There is just a brainstem doing the last thing it knows how to do. And that is why I keep coming back to the same idea. The death is ordinary. The recovery is not. Which brings us to the case that stretches that gap further than any other in this park's record. On the 5th of April, 2017, a 22-year-old named Jacob Gray left Port Townsend alone on a bicycle, towing a trailer full of camping gear. The next day, his bike and trailer and most of his equipment were found about 6.5 miles up Sol Duke Hot Springs Road and reported to Olympic National Park. The bike and trailer were in complete working order. That single detail is why this case became what it became. There was no wreck, no damage, no obvious reason for anyone to walk away from functioning equipment on a road. Clallam County Search and Rescue began searching from the 15th of April. In July, more than 100 volunteers searched along the Sol Duke River. Nothing. 16 months passed. On the 10th of August, 2018, a field crew of park employees and volunteers found abandoned equipment and clothing in a very remote part of the Daniel J. Evans Wilderness. The following morning, park law enforcement rangers searched the area properly and found more clothing and human skeletal remains. They were near the top of a ridge above Hoe Lake, around 5,300 feet of elevation, at least 15 miles from where the bike had been left. On open ground, nowhere near a trail. The King County Medical Examiner confirmed his identity through dental records. Clallam County's deputy coroner said the initial indication was no trauma. And here is where I'm going to stop and be precise, because precision is the whole point of this channel. The cause of death was never determined. An anthropologist at the medical examiner's office stated it could not be established and no autopsy was possible. His father has said investigators told him they believed hypothermia, but that is a family account of an investigator's belief, and it is not a ruling. I am not going to tell you Jacob Gray died of hypothermia, because no authority has said that. What I can tell you is that his clothing was found scattered along the ridgeline. I'm not going to tell you what that means either. It is consistent with something we discussed a few minutes ago. No official body has said so. And I am not going to narrate those 15 miles. Nobody knows the route. Nobody knows the reasoning. Nobody knows the timeline. There are no words from him. The entire middle of this story is a blank. And the honest thing to do with a blank is leave it blank. What we do know is the shape of it. A young man on a bike, on a road, 6 miles inside a national park. Found 16 months later, 15 miles away, 5,000 feet up, by a team of biologists who had gone into the mountains to study marmots. That's not a disappearance. That's a search failure, and we'll get to why they happen here. Because for all the attention hypothermia deserves, it is not Olympic's leading listed cause of death. Drowning is. 19% of those 52 deaths between 2007 and 2023. It's also the #1 unintentional killer across the entire park system at 33%, and it has held that position since 2007. Water is the most consistently lethal thing in American national parks, and it has never once been the thing people are afraid of. The mechanism has two halves. The first is what cold water does to a body in the opening seconds. Immersion triggers an involuntary gasp reflex. You inhale, whether or not your head is above the surface. Then, over the following minutes, your muscles cool past the threshold for coordinated movement. This is swim failure. It is not exhaustion and it is not panic. It is a mechanical loss of the ability to make your arms do what you are telling them to do, and strong swimmers experience it on exactly the same timeline as weak ones. The second half is specific to this landscape. Glacier-fed rivers. Snowmelt driving flows far higher than they look. Rock surfaces coated in algae and moss. And narrow canyon constrictions that accelerate the water and then hold whatever enters them. On the 8th of June, 2025, an 18-year-old from Waco, Texas, in the park with friends a week after his high school graduation, was walking across the rocks at the top of Salt Duke Falls when he slipped. Witnesses told rangers he went over the 50-foot falls, resurfaced at the bottom, and submerged again. The park's swift water and rope rescue teams responded immediately. Ground teams searched the riverbanks. Thermal imaging was used on the water. Half a dozen local agencies assisted. A ranger located him completely submerged, pinned between the first and second falls. The recovery itself was a technical problem. High temperatures had driven rapid snowmelt in the upper drainage, so flows were elevated. There was a constriction point beneath the main falls accelerating the water. There was a second waterfall and a whirlpool downstream, and there were vertical 50-foot cliffs covered in algae and moss. Here's the part that should bother you. The hike to Salt Duke Falls is a 1.6-mile loop with about 200 feet of elevation gain. It is one of the easiest walks in the park. Falls are the third leading unintentional cause of death across the park system at 17%, and in the mountain parks of Washington they move much closer to the top. At Mount Rainier, falls account for 35% of all deaths. Of 10 climbing fatalities, 9 were falls. At North Cascades, 41% of all fatalities were falls while climbing or hiking. The mechanism is unglamorous. Wet rock with moss or algae on it has almost no friction, and in this terrain there is frequently nothing below you to stop the slide. But the interesting part is the direction. Falls cluster on the descent, not the ascent. 3 reasons, all of them physical. You're tired, so your foot placement is sloppier. Gravity is now working with the mistake instead of against it. And going downhill, you cannot see your own feet or the surface you're committing them to nearly as well as you could on the way up. Every part of your planning treats the summit as the finish line. Your legs, your water, your daylight, your attention, all budgeted to get up. Nothing in your head has allocated anything to getting down. The trip is over in your mind before it's over in reality. And that's a pattern worth keeping in view, because it's the same pattern as everything else in this video. The danger arrives after the moment you'd stopped watching for it. There's a category I need to name plainly once, because leaving it out distorts everything else. The second highest cause of death recorded at Olympic National Park is suicide. Of the 3 Washington parks, Olympic has the highest count of intentional deaths, and all of them were male. Across the park system, 165 suicides were recorded between 2014 and 2016. 95% of all intentional deaths. I'm not going to say anything further about it, and I'm not going to speculate about any individual. But it belongs in an honest accounting, and it is systematically absent from every mysterious vanishing video ever made. That absence quietly warps your picture of who disappears in a national park. If any of this sits close to home, please talk to someone. A crisis line in your country is a reasonable place to start. Then there's the category with no decision in it at all. 16 people were killed by a falling tree or branch across the National Park Service between 2014 and 2023, and both Olympic and Mount Rainier appear on that list. In one Olympic case, a 34-year-old Canadian man died when a tree came down on his tent at Elk Lake, a remote wilderness campsite. The physics are simple. Saturated soil loosens root plates. Old growth here runs to 300 feet. Add wind. At Mount Rainier, avalanches account for 9% of deaths. At North Cascades, rockfall accounts for 11. And there's a specific geological reason. Weathering and freeze-thaw cycles have fractured the granite there, so holds and ledges detach under load. You cannot prepare for any of this, which is precisely why nobody does. It doesn't feature in anyone's risk assessment because there's nothing to assess. And then there's the coast, which is the most deceptive terrain in the entire park. The Olympic coastal route only functions at low tide. Tidal swing runs 8 to 10 feet. At certain headlands, the passage that was opened 2 hours ago is now a rock wall meeting the ocean, and there is no route inland and no route out. A storm makes it worse in a way people don't anticipate. Weather can push the tide in faster and higher than the chart you consulted this morning predicts. Your information was accurate and is now wrong. Sneaker waves compound it. The National Weather Service notes that there can be 30 minutes of small waves immediately preceding a large set, which is exactly long enough for a reasonable person to conclude that today is calm. I could not find a verified death count for tidal entrapment in this park, so I'm not going to give you one. What I'll give you instead is the shape of the problem. A beach is the one place in a national park that everyone's instincts read as safe. Here, it's a timed corridor. Quick one before the second half, because this is the point where it stops being about the park and starts being about you. If you've ever pushed on past a warning sign because you felt fine, tell me in the comments, and if this is making you rethink a trip you've already booked, drop a like so it reaches other people planning the same one. Because the part most people get wrong is still ahead of us. Here's the thing about everything we've just walked through. Those causes are not a list. They're a sequence. They don't add, they stack. Watch how it assembles. It rains, which is not dangerous. Your shell wets out at the shoulders, which is not dangerous. You're now losing heat about 25 times faster through that fabric than you would dry, which is not dangerous yet either. You've been walking 6 hours, so shivering, your body's own heater, is running out of fuel. Your fine motor control goes slightly. Your judgment goes slightly. You do not notice either, because the noticing apparatus is what went. Now it's getting dark, which is not dangerous on its own, except the rock is wet, and wet rock on a descent is the highest risk configuration in this environment. And you're descending with degraded coordination in low light because the day ran longer than you planned. None of those things is the event. There is no event. There's an accumulation, and at some point in the accumulation, your margin reaches zero, and then a completely ordinary mistake, a step you have taken 10,000 times, produces an outcome that is not ordinary at all. That's what these parks actually do. They don't attack. They subtract. And when it's finished, what remains is a death that a coroner can categorize in a single word, in a place where nobody can find you. Ordinary dying. Extraordinary silence afterward, which raises the question that this format exists to answer. Not what killed them, we've done that. The harder question is why anyone would let it get that far. The answer is inside your own head, and it's the most uncomfortable part of this. Here's what the data actually says about the decision that kills people here. It isn't made badly, it's made by hardware that's already compromised. Go back to the umbles, stumbles, mumbles, fumbles, grumbles. Those appear at mild hypothermia. Not severe, mild. The stage where a person is still walking, still talking, still making plans, and still entirely convinced they are operating normally. This is the spine of the whole thing, so I want to state it as directly as I can. Your ability to assess whether you should turn around is a function of your brain. Your brain is a temperature-sensitive organ. As you cool, the assessment degrades, and it degrades in a way that feels, from the inside, exactly like being fine. You will not catch it. That's not a character flaw, it's a design constraint. And here's what that actually looks like on the ground. In December 2014, a 60-year-old man from Port Angeles named Jim Griffin went for a day hike in the Boulder Creek area of the Elwha Valley. He was last seen at the hot springs in the late afternoon. He would have been walking back to his car in the dark. His day pack was found about half a mile from the trailhead, roughly 50 feet off the trail, with a soda can, a coffee cup, and a bag of freeze-dried food set out on a log nearby. 50 feet. He stepped off the trail to have a snack and could not find the trail again. Around 24 searchers gridded within 500 feet of that pack. It was raining, with nighttime temperatures near freezing. He was found roughly a third of a mile from the Boulder Creek Trail and nearly 1,000 vertical feet above it. Olympics spokesperson at the time, Barb Maines, said there was nothing to suggest anything other than someone who lost his location, couldn't find his pack, and became disoriented. On why he went uphill, she noted something I have not stopped thinking about. In the dark, it's easier to walk uphill because you feel more in control. That's it. That's the entire mechanism of a vanishing. 50 feet, a snack, and the dark. And now imagine needing help out there. Roughly 95% of Olympic National Park is designated wilderness. No roads, access on foot or horseback. Now here's the number that reframes everything else. Mount Rainier, North Cascades, and Olympic, 3 national parks, covering a substantial fraction of an entire state's mountain terrain, share one contract short-haul rescue helicopter for the summer season. The Navy and Coast Guard serve as contingency. One aircraft, and it can be taken away from you by weather at any moment. During the search for a missing hiker named Laura Mackey, a Coast Guard helicopter's efforts were impeded by changing weather. Rain and snow limited aircraft, with temperatures near or below freezing in the search area. So ground-only extraction here isn't the exceptional case. It's a normal Tuesday. In one documented Sol Duke rescue, a storm grounded the helicopter, so rangers trail ran 9 miles in carrying minimal gear, stabilized the patient, and camped overnight on the scene. The next morning, a mule team was sent in. And the final mile was too steep for the mules. That is what help is coming means in this park. And scale is no guarantee. The MACA search in the autumn of 2022 involved 19 agencies. Ground teams, K-9 units, drones, boats, helicopters. She was never located. That's the sentence that should stay with you. 19 agencies, every tool available, and the park simply did not give her back. Then look at the 2 cases we've spent the most time on. Angel Bulia, 10 weeks, 41 search personnel, 5 dog teams, found a few miles from her own car. Jacob Gray, 16 months, found by biologists who were up there counting marmots. Old growth canopy defeats aerial search. 12 feet of rain a year defeats scent. 95% wilderness defeats ground coverage. And there is one helicopter. The dying is ordinary. The finding is the impossible part. So the only real question left is who this happens to. And the answer is much less comfortable than the genre lets on. Across the whole park system, 79% of the people who die are male and 53% are 45 or older. For this specific region, there's better data. A peer-reviewed review of recreational wilderness injuries at Mount Rainier and Olympic, covering 1997 to 2001, examined 535 cases, including 19 deaths. Mean age, 34, 59% male. Rate of 22.4 injuries per million visits. But the details underneath that are the ones that matter. Most injuries happened in summer, between noon and 6 in the evening, 90% in daylight, not at night, not in storms, not in the backcountry at the edge of human capability. In the afternoon, in good conditions, in the busy season. In the activity breakdown, hiking, 55%, winter sports, 15, mountaineering, 12, hiking, not climbing, not anything requiring a rope or a permit or a skill. Walking. Now look at the cases in this video because the pattern in the ones we can verify is consistent and it is not the pattern the genre sells you. Laura Mackey was described by her family as an experienced hiker who chose a route that was challenging but not insane. Jim Griffin was a local man, 60 years old, on a day hike, half a mile from the trailhead. Angel Bulia bought camping gear before she went in. The teenager at Sol Duke Falls was on a 1.6-mile loop with 200 feet of gain, a week after graduating. I want to be careful and say I found no data set breaking Olympics victims down by preparation level, so I'm not giving you a percentage. But in every case we can actually verify there is no reckless outlier. There is no one who ignored a closure or free soloed a wall or went in without a plan. There are people who are roughly as prepared as you are. who made a decision that was roughly as reasonable as yours would have been. And then the margin ran out. Olympic National Park is not hunting anyone. There's no malice in it and no pattern beyond weather and terrain. It simply keeps operating. It rains. The light goes early. The rock stays slick. The canopy stays closed. The water runs cold enough to take your arms away in under 10 minutes, and the temperature sits in that mild gray band where nobody thinks to be afraid. And for a handful of people every year, that indifference is the last thing they encounter, not as an attack, but as an absence. Nothing arriving, nothing noticing. The dying, when it comes, is ordinary. It's the silence afterward that looks like a mystery. This is a place that gives you no dramatic warning and then takes an extraordinarily long time to give you back. The fact I can't get past is Jim Griffin's day pack. 50 feet off a trail, half a mile from a car park, with a coffee cup set out on a log, and it still ended 1,000 feet up a hillside in the dark. Which mechanism surprised you most, and which place should I take apart next? Tell me below, and if you want the real reasons these places kill people rather than the retellings, subscribe.